Extreme demons are the lifeblood of Geometry Dash. New levels in the top 10 often attract hundreds of thousands of onlookers and praise for their difficulty. Levels like Cataclysm, Bloodbath, Sonic Wave, and Bloodlust are all widely beloved with millions of downloads in-game. That love doesn't extend to every new top level, however. There's a level that was hated across the community both before and after its rating. A level so infamous for being bad, people still cite it as an example of the rating system's flaws. This is the story of Thinking Space. Thinking Space started out as just another impossible level during the flood of them in early 2.0. It didn't garner much attention, nor did anybody try to beat it. It just existed as an empty vessel someone could maybe get to in the far future. For players in 2.0, it would have been far too much to attempt. The hardest demon was still Bloodbath after all. The first half of the level wasn't that bad, but when you get to the last 40%, the difficulty spikes dramatically with some incredibly evil gameplay design. Thinking Space was a crazy nerve control challenge due to the lack of balancing. Eventually in 2.1, the level would start to gain some recognition after Stormfly uploaded a cut replay of the full thing. It was the first good quality recording of the level and probably where most people saw it for the first time. 1 month later, the level would end up getting even more attention when it featured in Hequinox's Impossible Level World Record video. He would end up making the first notable progress with 40%. He also ended up getting 37 to 67, but wasn't able to tackle the hardest section of the level. The video currently sits at over 500,000 views and surely brought a lot of attention to Thinking Space and the other levels in it. Afterwards, it fell into obscurity again. It seemed like nobody was both good enough to try and willing to go for Thinking Space. Would it end up as just another forgotten impossible level, or could it become something more? Especially since nobody had ever been able to do the hardest gameplay the level presented at this point in time. If there's one thing about this game, it's that someone dedicated enough will always end up showing up. This is Atomic, and he just achieved 50% on Thinking Space. This already was a good run for the time, but Atomic would not stop here. Atomic became the first in the world to reach the hard part from zero and took the world record in the process. When asked if the level was even possible, he simply said barely yes. It was not going to be an easy journey from here if he intended on verifying the level. This run made up both of Hequinox's runs combined into a single attempt. As time went on, Thinking Space was beginning to seem more and more possible. It wouldn't take him much longer to up his best to 73%, and then he got potentially the most important run on the level to date. On a normal level, 68 to 100 would just be a little run you get to begin the learning process, but on Thinking Space it was different. It proved it was possible to pass all the hardest gameplay in the level once and for all. Atomic would end up saying that run alone was as hard for him as beating the at the time list demon Hyperparacosm. There was no more room to doubt the possibility of being able to beat Thinking Space anymore. It was time for Atomic to lock in and see if he could close it out. 81% and 88% followed not long after, and it was seeming like any day could be the day Thinking Space is proven possible once and for all. On February 11, 2019, Atomic would get his best run yet. He choked at the very end of the level. It already was a devastating fail, but what would follow on could only be described as one of the most painfully unlucky stretches of any player's career. The final stretch may have been incredibly rough for Atomic, but not once did he quit on himself. He still believed he could do it no matter how many last cube deaths the level threw at him. No matter what, Thinking Space was going to be verified. Months of unfortunate fails would eventually give way for the completion. On April 9, 2019, Atomic would get his chance. Would he be able to finally close out this chapter? After 75,594 grueling attempts, Atomic could finally call himself the verifier of Thinking Space. An unlikely journey started for the memes came to fruition. Thinking Space had gone from an obscure impossible level to a verified extreme demon ready to place on the list. Although the verification was a huge weight off his shoulders, the problems for it would not end with that. To place on the demon list, levels need to be rated by the game's developer RobTop. It's a simple enough rule that ensures a level needs to be a demon in-game to get on the demon list. This would end up becoming a huge problem for Thinking Space though. By the time it was verified, it was very much outdated, and a large swath of the community was vehemently against it ever being rated as a result of this. You couldn't mention the level without multiple people going on about how it's garbage and should never be rated. It was still relevant throughout the community, but not as an esteemed achievement or a demon list level, but as a representation of the hate towards top levels that don't have the best of decoration. People assumed if it got rated, it would irreversibly change the way the rating system worked for the worst and inspire a flood of low-quality levels. Despite all that, there were still people who liked Thinking Space and wanted to see it get rated. Mainly those in the playing community who valued the achievement and the time Atomic dedicated to it. One player, NCAT, was even dedicated enough to jump to it from Bloodbath, and he actually ended up pulling it off, becoming the level's first victor. Around then, the tide changed and more opposing opinions supporting Thinking Space started to be voiced. Eventually, the contentious discourse around the level reached the ears of Viperin, and he would end up asking RobTop if he thought the level should be rated. And so on March 29, 2020, it finally happened. Thinking Space got a star rating and was now eligible to place on the demon list. Those that supported the level were happy, but the move ended up angering many who viewed the level as being far below the rating standards the game should have. As time went on, the hate would end up fading away and people ended up gaining more appreciation for Thinking Space. As it stands, 166 people have beaten the level and many more victors are still to come. In the end, all ended up well for Atomic and Thinking Space.